You need to secure that data immediately. There's no time to waste.
The rain had been unforgiving that morning, slashing sideways against the half-finished commercial plaza, where workers in neon vests hurried like blurred shadows. But one man, broad-shouldered, weary-eyed, and soaked through his jacket, moved with a quiet determination that made him stand out even in the storm. His name was Daniel Reyes, a single father fighting through the hardest season of his life, and all he wanted was one more day of work, one more shift, one more chance to keep the lights on for his little girl. He didn't know that by noon, his entire world would be flipped upside down, and a question shouted over wind and scaffolding, "Why's my company's logo on your toolbox?" would expose a secret he had tried desperately to bury. If you believe in kindness, compassion, and second chances, please like this video, comment your thoughts, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe for more heart-touching stories. The morning had begun before sunrise for Daniel, as it always did, but today came with an extra weight. A yellow envelope slipped beneath his apartment door. Inside it, a final notice with bold letters that felt louder than thunder. Rent was overdue again, a late fee added to the pile, the landlord's patience thinning. For a moment, Daniel had just stood there holding the paper, torn between panic and exhaustion. Then he heard small footsteps behind him, and turned to see his daughter, Lily, 7 years old, her hair a tangle of sleep and innocence, rubbing her eyes and asking if it was Saturday yet. She still believed Saturday meant pancakes, cartoons, and walks to the little park near their building. Daniel didn't have the heart to tell her he could barely afford eggs now. At the site, he kept his head down and worked fast. The storm had delayed progress, and the contractor was on edge. Every hour mattered. Every mistake threatened the fragile income Daniel depended on. Most of the other workers knew little about him beyond the fact that he kept to himself and carried an old metal toolbox with a faded logo, Crescent Dynamics, etched across the lid. It was scratched, dented, and clearly had a story behind it, but nobody pressed him. The truth was, that toolbox was the last physical reminder of Daniel's old life, a life he never imagined would vanish the way it did. Crescent Dynamics had once been his home. He had worked there for almost a decade in the maintenance department. Not glamorous, not high-paying, but stable. He was known, respected even, for his dedication. He had fixed everything from office HVAC systems to malfunctioning robotics equipment in their warehouse division. And because he never refused a call, never complained, and never broke company protocol, he was trusted with a special toolbox, company-issued, personalized, and symbolic. It had his initials engraved on the underside of the lid. The company had changed ownership last year, spiraling through restructuring, and somehow, the department Daniel belonged to ended up on the list for downsizing. He was told it wasn't personal, but at the same time, it was the most personal blow of all. He begged to stay, not for pride or ambition, but for his daughter, whose medical bills were stacking up higher than he could climb. But business was business, they said. There was no place for him anymore. That day, the security guard escorting him out had allowed him one small mercy, to keep the toolbox. "It's practically yours," the guard had whispered. "You earned it." He had walked out of the glass doors with shaking hands, clutching the only thing left from a job that had been his lifeline. The months that followed had been a spiral of rejections, temporary gigs, borrowed money, and hard compromises. His daughter's asthma had worsened, his savings disappeared, and life became a constant leap from one unstable job to another. But today, that stormy day, something shifted. Around noon, a fleet of luxury SUVs rolled into the muddy construction area. The workers exchanged glances, curious and uneasy. The vehicles pulled up near the main foundation where the steel structure was beginning to rise. Doors swung open, and out stepped a group of executives in crisp suits, flanked by assistants carrying tablets despite the rain. At the center of them was a man in a charcoal coat, tall, sharp-featured, and unmistakably in charge. Elias Kane, the new CEO of Crescent Dynamics, the same company that had let Daniel go. Daniel saw him from a distance but kept his head down. He didn't need trouble. He didn't want memories. He only wanted his pay for the day. But trouble, or fate, whichever name one prefers, came to him anyway. As Daniel crouched near a junction box tightening a connection, a shadow fell across him. He looked up to see polished dress shoes inches from his own mud-splattered boots. When he raised his gaze further, his heart stuttered. The CEO himself was staring at him, but not at him exactly, at the toolbox lying open beside him. Elias's eyes narrowed sharply. "What on earth?" he began, then spoke louder to be heard over the wind. "Why's my company's logo on your toolbox?" The workers nearby froze. The supervisors turned their attention toward the confrontation. Daniel felt his throat tighten, heat rising behind his eyes. He had not stolen it. He had not forged anything. But guilt, fear, and old wounds collided inside him as he stood up slowly, wiping his hands on his soaked jacket. He wanted to explain. He wanted to defend himself. But for a moment, he couldn't speak at all. Elias waited, his posture rigid. Finally, Daniel found his voice and managed to tell him that the toolbox had been issued to him years ago, back when he worked for Crescent Dynamics. He explained the downsizing, the termination, the single-father struggles that had swallowed him whole. He spoke without bitterness, yet with the rawness of someone who had fought too long in silence. The rain washed over his face, but Elias saw the pain behind his eyes. As Daniel talked, Elias's expression shifted from suspicion to confusion, then to something softer, harder to define. When Daniel mentioned his daughter's medical bills and the reason he had begged to keep his job, a ripple of discomfort crossed the CEO's face. It was clear this was not the story he expected. Elias asked why Daniel hadn't applied again after the restructuring. Daniel said he had tried. His resume had been lost somewhere in the digital maze. No calls, no replies. Eventually, he gave up. Elias looked around at the half-finished site, the mud, the chaos, and back at Daniel. His soaked clothes, his trembling hands, and the determination in his posture despite everything. Something in him changed. Without warning, Elias crouched beside the toolbox, brushing a finger across the logo as if seeing it differently now. He asked Daniel why he kept it after everything. Daniel shrugged weakly and said it reminded him of who he used to be. Someone steady, someone useful, someone his daughter could depend on. For a long, surreal moment, the CEO said nothing. Then he stood, turned to his assistant, and ordered her to clear his afternoon schedule. What followed stunned everyone. Elias asked Daniel to take him on a walk around the site. Not the fancy tour the contractor had prepared, but Daniel's version. The version a real worker saw. The version that revealed what needed fixing, what needed planning, what needed foresight, dragging his wet coat through mud. Elias followed Daniel up scaffolding, into electrical rooms, through supply areas, and under fragile beams. Daniel explained everything with a quiet authority he didn't even realize he still had, the same competence that had once made him invaluable. By the time they finished, Elias had heard enough to make up his mind. He asked Daniel if he was available that evening for a meeting. Daniel froze, blinking through the rain, certain he had misheard. Elias clarified that he wanted to discuss a position at Crescent Dynamics directly with him. A real position. Not a temp job, not a trial shift. Something stable, meaningful, and suited to his experience. Something that came with healthcare. Daniel couldn't breathe. He couldn't speak. His chest tightened, not with fear this time, but with a fragile rising hope he had not felt in months. He whispered yes. That evening, Daniel sat nervously in the warm, brightly lit conference room of Crescent Dynamics headquarters, the same place he once ran maintenance calls for. Now he was seated at a table across from the CEO himself. Elias spoke candidly, telling him that many decisions from the restructuring had been misguided, that good people like Daniel had been lost in the chaos, that he wanted to build a different culture, one that valued loyalty, skill, and real-life challenges. He offered Daniel a position as Senior Site Safety and Efficiency Coordinator, a role he created right on the spot. The salary was more than Daniel had ever earned. The benefits would cover Lily's medical needs. And the stability, it was something he thought he'd never feel again. Daniel broke down. He tried to apologize for crying, but Elias shook his head and told him never to apologize for being human. When Daniel finally stepped outside the building hours later, the rain had stopped. The city lights reflected, off puddles, like 1,000 tiny miracles. He clutched his old toolbox in one hand and a new contract, signed and sealed, in the other. He knew his life had changed, but he didn't fully grasp how far that change would ripple until months later. With his new job, he moved his daughter into a safer apartment, one with clean air filters that helped her asthma. He could finally afford her treatments, healthier food, and even small joys like art supplies and weekend outings. Her laughter returned, bright, unburdened, healing, and every morning she hugged him with pride, calling him her hero, unaware of the nights he used to cry quietly so she wouldn't. Here. At Crescent Dynamics, Daniel became a respected pillar. Workers trusted him, managers listened to him. His experience shaped new training programs. He helped prevent accidents, improve designs, and bridge the gap between office executives and everyday employees. People said he worked with both hands and heart, and in a world where compassion felt rare, that combination was priceless. One day, after reviewing a new construction blueprint, Elias asked him if he ever thought about running his own division. Daniel laughed at the idea, but Elias reminded him that the best leaders are forged in fire, not comfort, and Daniel had survived flames most would never understand. Now, standing in his modest yet warm new home, watching Lily draw colorful shapes on the living room floor, Daniel sometimes found himself staring at the old toolbox in the hallway. He kept it polished now, not because he needed it for work anymore. He had newer tools, advanced equipment, even a company car, but because it represented the journey that nearly broke him and ultimately rebuilt him. He had gone from being discarded to being seen, from being invisible to being valued, from barely surviving to finally living, and all because a CEO asked one unexpected question on a stormy afternoon. If this story touched your heart even a little, please like this video, comment your thoughts, share it to inspire someone, and subscribe to stay part of this kindness-filled community. Before we end, drop a comment below. What does second chances mean to you?